One of the most difficult groups of birds to identify on the Pacific coast of North America are cormorants. It's a really wide family with three distinct, very similar looking species. This is the Brant Cormorant, Double-Crested Cormorant, and Pelagic Cormorant. Today, I'm going to be showing you guys how you can differentiate these three species based on behavior, field marks, etc. So, let's get started first with our Double-Crested Cormorant. The Double-Crested Cormorant is one of the most common cormorants along the Pacific coast of North America. These guys are allowed to go into freshwater areas inland of the Pacific coast and not just along the salty coastline. These guys you can see in ponds, streams, lakes, etc., along with that coastline of the Pacific coast. The best field mark to identify these guys is this really bright orange coloration around its beak, this fleshy orange coloration kind of next to the eye and along the beak. In addition, they also have these distinctive crests that go on either side of their head. This you can only see in breeding season, but when you do see it, this is a very distinctive field mark. In addition to this, they also have something that's kind of interesting when it comes to feather coloration. This is kind of a field mark that's called scaly coverts. This means that there's a different coloration along, if you look right here, you can see it especially well. The back of these birds, the feathers are differently colored. You can see it makes it look kind of a scaly appearance, where it's kind of dark and then light and then dark and then light. It kind of gives it this scaly back appearance. So this is another great identifier for the Double-Crested Cormorant. This bird on the top right is a juvenile Double-Crested Cormorant. This guy may have scaly coverts on his back as well. The coverts are only this back area of the bird here. So this guy on the front here is a Double-Crested Cormorant juvenile or first year. You can see it's a juvenile because it has kind of this white, kind of a light white tan coloration, whereas the adults will be all black like these three birds on the bottom. This guy on the top right here is kind of this tan color. Same bird, same field marks, but he's going to be younger because he has this tan coloration. And the other birds' juveniles don't get this tan when they're juvenile, so this is another distinctive characteristic for these individual birds when they're young. Okay, in addition to this, Double-Crested Cormorants also, when they're flying, have a distinctive crook in their neck. You can see this in this picture right here, where you can see this kind of bend in his neck. This is something Brant Cormorants and Pelagic Cormorants don't have when they're flying. So if you see this crook in the neck, that's a double-crested as well. Also, if you see Double-Crested Cormorants flying high above the ocean, that's another thing that's specific just to this species. Brant Cormorants and Pelagic Cormorants, you'll only see flying about maybe 10 feet above the ocean at most. These guys will fly pretty high up there. And if you see these guys, again, over land or in like a fresh water source, this will be a Double-Crested Cormorant as well. All right, let's move on to our next cormorant species. This guy right here is the Brant Cormorant. Unlike the Double-Crested Cormorants, these guys live only along the coastline and in the ocean. You won't be seeing these guys in freshwater sources. So, these guys are slightly smaller than Double-Crested Cormorants. This is the Brant Cormorant. Brant Cormorant have this blue coloration under their throat in breeding season. When it's not breeding season, it gets a little bit more tricky when it comes to identification. And the best ID field mark, it's a little hard to see at times, is this tan stripe under its throat. You can see it here really distinctly in this adult breeding plumage bird. And then this bird on the right here is another Brant Cormorant. This guy is a juvenile, meaning he doesn't have this blue breeding throat patch, but he still has this tan spot under his throat. So this is very distinctive of the Brant Cormorant, is this, again, tan coloration under the throat, and then this blue coloration if it is applicable in breeding season. Again, you won't be seeing this scaly back with a different colored back that the Double-Crested does have. So this is kind of this is kind of the in-between bird, in-between cormorant of Double-Crested and Pelagic. Pelagic will be the next one we're looking at. So let's move on to the Pelagic Cormorant. This is our next species. Next and last species. These guys are also very distinctive. These Pelagic Cormorants are way smaller than Double-Crested Cormorants and even smaller than Brant Cormorants. These guys are a lot more distinctive in the fact that usually you won't be seeing this red face Usually a bird will look a lot more like this guy on the bottom right. Usually you won't be able to see this red face. This is more breeding season, but this slender beak here and this slender beak here is something that's very specific to just pelagic cormorants. So they're gonna be much smaller, much more streamlined. They're gonna have almost a pencil-like bill. You can see that right here, super small, thin little bill. In addition, you can see it has this really glossy coloration to it. When the sun hits it just right, you can see really glossy. Brants, to an extent, have this glossy coloration. Double-crested almost do not at all. But this Pelagic Cormorant has a very glossy coloration. A lot of times they also have kind of spiky heads. You can see especially here, little tufts of feathers coming up from their head. This isn't a requirement, but that's something if you see, that's also going to be a pelagic. And then lastly, if you see one in flight or with their wings up, they have this really distinct white patch on their side. So this is going to be super helpful for pelagic cormorants as well. So we got these three guys kind of down. It's kind of this is an ideal circumstance. So we got these three guys down, and this is all kind of an ideal, perfect situation. So let's look at some examples where it's a little bit more tricky. Again, here's our pelagic cormorant. This is the glossy coloration, thin little pencil bill, and then thin little pencil bill. Okay, so this is when it gets a little bit more tricky, is when it's actually in the field. This we have our three cormorants. Take a look at this and see what you can see. Maybe just take a moment, look for size, smaller birds, larger birds. Look for that scaly back of one of these birds. Look for the tan coloration under the throat of the Brants. Look for the pencil bill of the pelagic and the orange on the bill of the double crested. So take a moment, take a look. All right, so this guy on the left here is our Brant Cormorant. Kind of a larger cormorant, not as large as the double crested. In this example, he's pretty large actually. But the first thing you can look at here is this tan under the bill. You can't really see any blue, but you can definitely see this tan stripe. That's kind of a distinctive coloration for that bird. This next one here you can see is much smaller. This is by far the smallest cormorant in this group. You can also see a really thin little beak, along with a fairly glossy countenance. The Brants is also pretty glossy, so that's not something you should go off completely. But then again, really small, streamlined bird, no coloration around the throat. It's not orange, it's not tan. This guy is a pelagic cormorant, that thin little pencil bill. And then this last guy on the right here is a little tricky because he's a juvenile or a not completely fully grown adult. So you can see he's a little less black than some of the adult double-crested cormorants we have. He has some brown coloration, but you can really distinctively see this really scaly back. That's a great field mark. In addition to that, we have this really bright orange coloration on the beak and around the beak. It's orange, the beak is actually orange for the juveniles, and it does eventually become dark for the adults, but it still retains this really bright orange on the bill. So this is a great example of double-crested cormorant, the scaly and the orange. And then you'll see the bill will become dark in adulthood, whereas this guy has that kind of orange coloration on his bill still in younger years. Here's another example. This is kind of like when it gets tricky. It's really hard to see examples, really hard to see distinctions here. But if you look pretty closely, you can see this guy in the middle here is pretty small. This guy on the right, pretty large. Guy on the left, pretty large. It's a little tricky, but you can see under the throat of this first guy, you can see some tan coloration. And over here, again, you can see some tan coloration. So this kind of overall larger bird with tan under the bill and no orange under the bill, you can kind of disregard double-crested cormorants because it has no orange under the bill. So you're like, okay, there's only one large cormorant left, and it's a Brant Cormorant, and it should have tan under the bill, which this guy has. So does this guy have. So this on the left and on the right are both Brant Cormorants. The guy in the middle is a different species. You can see he's much smaller. Even though he's close to us, he's still smaller. He's got a really thin little beak, small little head, streamlined neck, overall just streamlined small body. This will be your pelagic cormorant. No coloration under the bill either. This is pelagic cormorant. Here's a very tricky example. You can see this guy on the right here, overall very small, very glossy coloration. These are both in very bright sun, very glossy coloration. You can see really small beak, no coloration under the throat. This guy will be our Pelagic Cormorant. Kind of all these things pointing toward it. This one on the left is very difficult because it is actually a young Brant Cormorant. You can see the beak is larger. This one's very small, this one's fairly large. You can also see some tan under the throat. And you'll also see this guy's kind of all brownish. There's not any glossy coloration to it, especially in the sun here. So this guy will be our Brant Cormorant. This is kind of a tricky one because he's very young. So he's kind of lacking the tan coloration under the throat. This will be our Brant Cormorant in comparison to this Pelagic Cormorant. If these guys were side by side, you would also see the Pelagic Cormorant would be a good deal smaller than this Brants. All right, guys. So hopefully this helped. Leave a comment if you want any other IDs for other groups of birds. This is kind of a very important group of species to know for the Pacific coast of North America. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening.